From Boca Raton, Florida, this is Behind the Bima. On this episode, Rabbi Goldberg and co-host Rabbi Josh Brody are joined by Avi Mayer, the immediate past editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. With over 250,000 Twitter followers and a monthly reach in the tens of millions, Avi is recognized as one of the leading millennial voices in Israel and the Jewish community worldwide. Avi shares the challenges and triumphs of navigating the worlds of traditional media and real-time news updates on social media, discusses the importance of accurate information dissemination, and shares his thoughts on the differences between traditional media and social media and the responsibility of representing not just oneself, but larger organizations and communities. Plus, the importance of sleep and the power of ice baths. All this and more behind the Bima.
Welcome back to Behind the Bima. I'm your host, Rabbi Avi Goldberg, joined by my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Joshua Brody. Rabbi Brody, how are you, my dear friend?
We are great. New
now,
season.
Rabbi Brody, are there some bags under your eyes we see from waking up so early for Kolel Boker? Last week you told our audience.
Boker. First
last
of all,
week you spoke about the new 5 a.m. man.
5 a.m. And you know, because you were there. You were there most days.
I was away. No, any day I wasn't there, it's because I'm out of Boca.
It's amazing.
How's the 5 a.m.? Can a night person become a morning person?
Can I tell you again? I think, and thank you for the recommendation on the book. There's a book now, the 5 a.m. Club, which I started listening to, and I think 5 a.m. could change your life. I really do believe it's a game changer for me personally. I think because once you get to bed earlier, you just stop wasting time. It's again, I find that after you come home from Mariv, it's like 8:30, and then it's like, what do I do? Let me check my phone. The video pops up, another video, and it's like, and now it's midnight. Okay, now I'm tired, and I got to get to bed. So
you're saying basically late at night, nothing good happens. You just
you gotta just
like wasting time at best, doing other stuff at worst. Nothing's good happening. So so if you can get to sleep early before that, you're past that productive time and you're wasted time. You're better.
Now there are people. I spoke to someone on Shabbos. They said, "No, I get all my stuff done at night. I'm a night person." Okay, if that's who you are, I just know for me, it is the worst. And if you can just again trick your body into getting tired because you're waking up so early, it's not easy to get out of bed, even with a couple hours at night. But everything changes.
What's your morning? Tell us about the morning routine. How's that working out? Your 5 a.m. wake
5 a.m. You go for a run, nice 3-mile run. 5:45, you hit the showers. You're in Shul 6:15 for
Boker, baby.
Boker. But then someone even said to me, they're like, "Well, you're doing the daf. You were doing it anyway, so you haven't really added to your day in terms of learning." But first of all, it's not true. I grab now the 5 minutes. I'm back in on the Mishnah Yomi, so that's actually good. But you're right.
It's a game changer. When you've had these victories, we spoke about this last week.
Yeah,
you start your day with victories.
It's an amazing victory. It's an amazing victory because now by 7 o'clock in the morning or 7:45, right? You got chakras, so like you've done more than some people have done. They're just waking up, and it's
a nice feeling. Well, I got a bunch of comments about the ice bath. It hasn't arrived yet. It's coming.
What are they saying? First of all, I know that you've been doing some more research. Is this something which you think is healthy? Are you getting a little discouraged? Maybe.
No. I'm all in, even though I've never done it. So that's easy to be all in. But I hope it will last. This is my move, by the way. When you talk about it publicly, now you have to do it.
Right. So, well, I agree. That's why I'm now all in on this whole book.
It's a strategy. It's a habit-changing strategy, by the way. It's brought down Atomic Habits, and Tony Robbins talks about. Tony Robbins has a whole. He says, if you talk about I'm going to start jogging, I'm going to jog, I'm going to run, I'm going to jog, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to. You never do it. Just a big talker. But if you tell everybody, yeah, I'm a runner, and they'll be like, oh, how much do you run? So you look like an idiot if you're a runner who doesn't run. Right. So once you now, we talk about that like in Torah. That if you take on it, I'm a ben Torah, or I'm a learner, or I'm somebody, I do chesed, I'm about tzedakah, I love outreach. So if you see your identity as something, now it would be pasnish. Like, what do you mean? You can't call yourself that thing if you don't do the thing. Right. So one of the strategies to get you to do something is to actually see yourself as that thing, and now you got to do it, because otherwise, well, it's ridiculous. What kind of runner doesn't run? What kind of about tzedakah doesn't give tzedakah? What kind of Torah learner doesn't learn Torah? So what kind of ice bath
guy doesn't
go in the ice bath. So it hasn't come yet. Right. I'm excited to report on it. But it's supposed to also, everything.
Are you going to do it in the morning? When do you do the ice bath? First thing?
It's a good question. Good question.
I want to be there.
Mostly after you work out, but that's missing right now too. So that's got to come back.
Right. But I'm saying, I'd be there when you jump in. I could film it. See what.
Yeah, probably not. But No, but I'm excited. You're supposed to. I just actually heard someone talking about it, and someone
Yeah.
swears by it, and they said you're in this non-natural state, right? In this freezing cold water. So your body's in this like fight or flight mode. It releases all these chemicals. You're the most alert you ever are. You have this flow, and there's science research that shows a lot of clarity. You sleep better. You have muscle recovery. It's better for your vascular system. It's better for digesting sugars. It's all these benefits. So
And
anyway,
and do
right now
you
I'm a
let
big talker.
again, is there like chlorine in it? Let's say someone else goes in it. Do you have to clean it out, or is it like a
Listen, I'm not prepared to have these conversations yet
no, because
because
I'm saying I wanna
I
go
haven't
in there.
got it
I
yet.
feel weird going into
Yeah.
like, if you went in and then I get in,
No, but people use a pool. People use a mikvah.
yeah, but a pool, you got chlorine, you clean
Right.
it out. It's
So this also could be emptied and filled or
oh,
you know.
is there like a tap? You
Yeah,
fill
yeah.
it
Yeah,
oh,
you can. I don't know how well. Again, it's early. It's early to talk about
right.
how it's used and what it's like. But
Right. But I
I'm
think what
excited.
happens also, and I think this is where it gets a little sticky, a little dangerous, is anytime you get excited about doing something, you wanna do more. I'm like, "Of course, I would like to do a little bit." So I started doing, like, again, trying to get back into the Shnai Mikra again. But the problem is like, there's so much to do, and, like,
You
how do
gotta
you
pace
pace
yourself.
yourself?
Yeah, yeah, no,
You
because
know?
if you do too much,
And
you'll end up doing nothing. So you gotta pace
right.
yourself. Realistic goal setting, pacing. I'll tell you that, this conversation where this Shabbos we're benching Rosh Chodesh Elul. Next week is Elul, and it's this time of year that I hope everybody's. It doesn't have to be the ice bath or the Mishnah B'Yomi, Mishnah Yomi, but like what's someone going to work on? What are you working
Right,
on?
Hill's a week away, and, like, this is the time to start
I'm almost ready to declare another thing, but I'm not ready to do it yet because I'm not prepared for the consequence of making the commitment. But I'm gonna, every year, Ella, we try to create a WhatsApp group, which is just a challenge
yeah,
of whether it was not looking at your phone the whole davening, leaving your phone in the car. We did one
right.
year
That's
planking. Everybody posted how long they planked for. It could
right.
be taking care of your body, taking care of your soul, taking care. So I'll tell you, the other area is
Yeah,
sleep. Sleep. I mean, that's what you were talking about
right.
changing your schedule radically changes your sleep, but the sleep. There's no question. We live in a culture and it's so unhealthy that we're sort of impressed with the people who have less sleep. Right? I barely slept. I slept so little. I only sleep. I don't need a lot of sleep,
Not
and
healthy.
they're killing. All the studies show that they're killing themselves. And anybody who goes to a sleep laboratory where they measure your cognitive function, and you think like, I don't need sleep. I sleep 4 hours, five
Right,
hours, 3.5 hours. I'm fine. I don't need sleep. You don't need sleep. Your cognitive function shows that you drive like you're drunk, like you're high, you can't think clearly.
right.
We all need more sleep, and we just have to admit it, and we have to then become disciplined to do it.
How much sleep?
I don't know. Not yet. I'm not there
Right,
yet.
not there yet? Okay. I'll tell you something I did yesterday, and I spoke about it last night at the shul was, you know,
That's
I'm
your
like
move, by the way. Speak about it at the shul, and then you have to do it.
right. No, it's like it was I'm always amazed by people that always have money, like a dollar bill in their pocket, ready to give tzedakah. I'm like, where do you have dollars from? Where do you have change from? I don't have change. I have a credit card. I never carry change. I don't go to the bank and take out
Don't
cash.
worry, the Mishloachim now have a credit card reader, so you're good.
I know, but I even said that. I said, Jeffrey's got the credit card machine, but I feel like tzedakah, you got to give it
Right,
you got to put money. It's got to be real
right,
money. You want to
right,
feel it. So I went to Chase and I said, hey, I want to take out, singles, just singles. And
right.
I got an envelope of singles. It was $100 in singles, right? And then I come to Mincha last night. I realized I forgot the envelope in the car. So I didn't have anything. But I took a few this morning. I threw a couple in the tefillin bag. And
It's
I want
beautiful.
to be that guy that, you walk
It's a
in the shul,
beautiful thing.
I'm gonna give it. There's this guy outside. I want to give $1. Like I'm
I love
never
it.
that guy. I'm always
You
like,
know,
I don't
The Rambam says, is it better to give $100 to one person
right.
or $1 to 100 people?
Oh, so what do you? Okay, I
Certainly,
don't.
the impact of $100 to one person is much more than $1 to 100
Right.
people. The Rambam says, give $1 to 100 people because every time you give, it's changing you. It's transformative for
I
you.
love that.
You're
That's really
giving.
nice.
So, there is that. I agree with you. And I have, a good friend I was with this summer who also was davening, at a place where the Meshulachim come in the whole time. And I was complaining to him, it's such a distraction. You're trying to daven. He's like, you just have to adjust. He goes, I go to the bank once a week, I pick up my dollars, they go in my talis bag, just give out my dollar. And while you're asking for you, you're also helping someone else. And it's a paradigm shift in the mentality. And you come prepared. And if
Yeah.
you come prepared, then you're less, resentful
I'm
about it.
so excited about this next. Again, I've never been that guy
What's the
because I
new thing?
never carry cash.
I
So I'm
love it.
just excited to be able to give. And I'll tell you, when I was at Chase, and I said to the teller, I said, I just want to take out, dollar bills. I don't know if she was wondering like why. Like I don't actually whatever. But I was gonna say to her, I was like little Bavich or Rebbe. I didn't do it. I was like in my head, I was like, here, you take $1
Yeah.
and you give it to charity also.
Right. Right. I'd probably
You know?
against bank policy take the dollar
Right, you
back,
probably
but
can't do it, right. But
yeah,
it's
but
nice. Give
Rabbi
it to your
Brody,
kid. "Here, take $1 to
you know
charity."
why everybody loves Rabbi Josh Brody? Because you're always so
Mm.
excited about the next thing. Whatever the next, you're so excited.
I'll tell you why I'm even more excited, because in growing up in Elizabeth, the only people that gave dollar bills stuck into the pushka was like Mr. Halper and then Mr.
The
Kramer,
builders, the
like the
builders,
real years. Everyone else gave a nickel or a
right,
dime. You didn't give a
right.
dollar.
The builders.
The builders, right,
That's
exactly. So
right.
I'm like a builder. I'm
Well,
one of those.
everybody's got to stay tuned next week because not only are we going to have another amazing guest, but you're going to get an update on Rabbi Brody for how early he going to sleep, Kola Boker, is he going for his run, and how the dollars that stuck during davening is
I'm
going.
like the Lubavitcher Rebbe now. I'm giving out dollars.
Maybe we'll have a report from the ice bath. We'll see.
Oh,
We'll see.
that would be breaking news. We gotta bring back the breaking news segment.
Breaking news, breaking news. But for today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming Avi Mayer, immediate past immediate past editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. I'm grateful to Avi because follow him on Twitter, and he's got real insight and accurate and reliable news coming from Israel before you even see the article about it at some other time. Born in New York, raised in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, and in Maryland, went to University of Maryland, served in the IDF, worked in the House of Representatives, Foreign Affairs Committee. Just fascinating person. AJC, doing great stuff, and we're glad we got to spend some time and go behind the Bima with Avi Mayer without any further ado. Welcome, Avi. We're excited to go behind the Bima with Avi Mayer, the immediate past editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, and today, and then a huge source of information and influence online on social media and well beyond. We're grateful for your time and thank you for going behind the Bima with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start right there. Avi, the other night, everyone was on the brink of war on the north, although that's actually a misnomer. It's been war since October 7th on the north. I know that you feel strongly about that. I wasn't on Times of Israel. I wasn't on J-Post. I wasn't on Fox or CNN. I was actually following your Twitter posts, which was giving me the most recent update, accurate update. Airports closed, airports back open. We did this. They were going to do that. And it was amazing. So what's your source of information? How are you able to disseminate that so quickly, so accurately, and get to it without having to run it by an editorial board and have the right picture, have the right title, and get it up and make sure the lawyer is okayed it before you post it? How has life changed from you from a traditional media Jerusalem Post to the world of sharing news and social media in real time, where I'm personally a beneficiary? So I'm grateful to you for that the other night and really every day.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it. The truth is that this is my more natural environment. I was actually at the Jerusalem Post for a relatively short period of time, but I've been rather active on Twitter since I think it was 2008. So it's been quite a long time. And the truth is, I got my start by doing exactly what you're describing, sort of taking information from various sources, some of them publicly available, including news websites, which I often cite, and others, WhatsApp groups, including those that are connected to the IDF and other security sources, where I get a sort of constant stream of information, sort of taking that and sharing it with my audience. In the instance that you described just the other day, the real reason is that I had taken too long a nap on Shabbos, and I was up at 5 to 5 a.m. When this all started, and then I sort of pushed myself to stay awake, and I started doing a series of interviews. I was on CNN and the BBC that morning, and it was very clear from very early on that something extraordinary was going on. This was not like anything that we had seen before. And as soon as that became clear, I realized that I had a role to play, and I think you saw the result of that.
And it was really very helpful and very accurate, and it was amazing. Going on CNN, and I saw that you were on I don't know if the BBC, you were on some British news as well. You've been on a lot, not only in these last few days, but regularly. So just talk to us about the different worlds of media, from the written, X or Twitter, and the ability to post there and your audience there, the international community on these traditional news stations, print news, Jerusalem Post. You're experienced in all these different realms. What has your experience been like? What are some of the things that you have to think about, or the considerations, or the audience of participating and contributing in those different ways?
Well, look, I've always held myself to what I would call quasi-journalistic standards, in that I'm not going to share information just because it comes my way and happens to align with the way I see things. I try to cross-reference sources, make sure that I'm coming from a reputable place. But not everyone on social media is like that, as we know. There's a lot of misinformation, I would say disinformation, that is intentional going out and being spread throughout the internet, including by accounts that have millions upon millions of followers. And as you said earlier, there are no safeguards. There's no editorial board. There's no one who's there to sort of ensure that things are at least somewhat resemblant of reality. And that is quite a stark difference from the traditional media world, where we do have those safeguards. There are editors, there are journalistic practices and ethics that need to be taken into account, sometimes more successfully than others. And we can talk about some of the significant missteps we've seen over the past few months on the part of the international media in covering this part of the world, which of course is not new, but has been, I think, even more intensely experienced by those of us who follow the news over the past few months. And sort of weaving in between the two of them, I think has actually been a very enlightening experience for me, because it shows the advantages of having a traditional newsroom and a news organization behind you, and sort of diversifying your news sources, making sure that you're getting them from a variety of different places, but those that are considered credible, versus this sort of democratization of information that we've seen on social media, which of course has many, many benefits. It means that anyone with a smartphone or a computer can be a producer of news, but of course it has many, many drawbacks, because you don't know how to evaluate what is or is not considered credible, and how seriously to take information that you're seeing. So there's a lot to discuss, but I think we've seen both of those two streams of media really intertwine over the past few months. I can tell you that when I was at the Jerusalem Post, some of the information we received, some of the breaking news items that we end up putting on our website came from social media. We would see the initial reports or the initial indications that something had happened on Twitter or elsewhere. We would then, of course, make sure to cross-reference it, speak to the security services, the IDF, wherever it might be, to make sure that there was actually something there. But that sort of cross-pollination between social media and traditional media, I think, has been very evident over the past few months.
Right. So I have a question about when you post. Do you have a handle on X and it says Avi Mayer, but you also, let's say, represent, let's say Jerusalem Post as an example, or any other organization. Is it important as an individual to say, listen, I'm putting this out, or do you represent an organization, or in this case, a news media, and you say, well, listen, let them tag me or I'll tag them? How do you decide who puts out the post?
Well, look, I've worked a variety of different places, and in some of those places, I was very, I think, public about representing those employers. And I was at the Jewish Agency. I was the spokesperson of the Jewish Agency. When I was at the American Jewish Committee, I oversaw communications there, and I was very straightforward about that. But no matter where I've been very cognizant of the fact that no matter whether or not people perceive me as being part of those organizations or speaking on their behalf, I am. And so I can't sort of get away with saying, well, I'm not speaking on behalf of the organization, I'm speaking in a private capacity. There's no such thing. I think that when you are a public-facing person, and as I think we all are to some degree now in this democratization of information, you have to realize that there's more to you than just you, that you do stand in front of or behind an organization. And by the way, it might only be an organization. I would say to some degree, when people are tweeting and identifying as Israeli, that has ramifications for how people view Israelis. If someone is tweeting and saying that they're Jewish, I think that has ramifications for how people view Jews. And I think that carries with it a certain degree of responsibility, whether or not it's fair, and whether or not it's reasonable for people to infer generalizations about groups, organizations, communities on the basis of an individual. The reality is that people do that. And so I would like to see more people exhibit that sense of responsibility when they speak publicly on social media. I'm not sure we always see that happening.
Do you feel you're speaking into an echo chamber? Like when you go on CNN, or certainly when you go on some of the European stations, there's maybe a hostile host, there's members of the audience who are hostile, and you're coming to inform them, and you're coming to try to confront some of their misnomers. On Twitter, for example, you have 250,000 followers growing. What percentage of them you think are already on your side, somewhat informed? People like me, care passionately about Israel, generally well-informed, just looking for somebody who's going to offer additional insight or bring more information as it's unfolding. Are you speaking into an echo chamber, or do you think in the social media realm that you're also having an impact? And the reason I ask is, using social media as a form of advocacy, we're all so disturbed by the bias, by the hate, by the double standards, by what's going on. And one of the ways we want to advocate is using social media. But how do we break out of social media where it's an echo chamber, where we're just creating a bubble of people who agree, think alike, care the same way, and we're speaking to each other rather than influencing the greater world?
Well, I think you've caught on to a reality that many of us have experienced. I think in some respects, many of us do find ourselves in echo chambers. And the question is, as you said, how do you break out of them? It can often feel great to have lots of people retweet and like your posts. But if it's people who share your worldview and they're then sharing it with other people who share your worldview, that's not really helpful, and it doesn't really go anywhere. I think it's a matter of picking up on what normal people are interested in at any given moment, using language that is relatable, not using too much insider jargon, or language that I would say is more neutral, even if I'm not wholly comfortable with it. So, for example, using the phrase the West Bank as opposed to Judea and Samaria may ultimately enable me to get across a broader message than I would be able to if I said Judea and Samaria, and I would thus either turn people off or people just have no idea what I was referring to. So is that the most accurate phrase? Probably not. Would I personally feel more comfortable referring to it as Judea and Samaria? Yeah, I probably would. But at the end of the day, I have to look at the big picture and say, well, if I'm trying to reach a broader audience, what's the language that they're going to find relatable? What are they going to be able to relate to, and then be more receptive to the message I'm trying to put out there? I think that unfortunately we see a little too much preaching to the choir, and not enough sort of figuring out how to reach those audiences. I know that there are a lot of organizations and individuals who are trying to do that work to some degree of success, but I would like to see more people, A, trying to reach those audiences, and B, using the language and the messaging that's appropriate to ensure that you're actually getting through and changing hearts and minds.
I turned on the news on Sunday morning after hearing all the noise and opening up WhatsApp and seeing what's happening in Israel. And of course, turn on Fox and CNN, and there's no news about what's happening. There's nothing. Are there back channels that you use to try and get them to say, listen, there's a massive attack that's happened right now? How come you guys aren't reporting on it?
I mean, look, the reality is that most of the journalists who you're seeing on your screens on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and really any channel, they're all on Twitter. They're all seeing the same things that I'm seeing and that you all are seeing. And it's a matter of making an editorial decision about what is most important to the audience at a given moment. The reality is that after a while, pretty much all the channels were broadcasting what was happening here in Israel. I can tell you that CNN has actually basically set up shop here. They've been here for several weeks. One of their main anchors, the individual I spoke to the other day, Jim Sciutto, spoken to him several times over the past few days, has basically been living in Tel Aviv for the past period of time in anticipation of things escalating with Hezbollah, possible retaliation from Iran, and just general ongoing activity. So they are primed to be available should there be breaking news to share that information with their audiences. But every network, every news organization will make its own calculus and determine whether or not it's something that they feel is immediately relevant to their audience, something that you or I may feel is incredibly important because it affects us so directly, we feel so personally affected by it, may not be so relevant to the broader audience demographic, whoever it may be, of a given network. And so I think it's on us to make sure that the things that we care about are being made available to those audiences by maintaining relationships, by ensuring that information is being put on social media and then caught onto by these news organizations, as it very often is. But that can often be a very challenging task.
What do you do to make sure you're not in an echo chamber? Who do you listen to, or who do you follow on Twitter? Can you tell our listeners or give some ideas or advice to hear the other side, to know what they're thinking? Because Rabbi Rudy just said you could turn on Fox News and CNN, and they're both reporting the same story, and you might as well be living on two different planets. They're describing two different episodes because of the different perspective that they bring. So, can you give us some insight? Who do you follow? Who do you listen to and watch to make sare that you're not in your echo chamber?
Well, I would hesitate to give these people any more followers than they already have, but we're talking about individuals who are quite influential, who often have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of followers, and who utilize their platforms for what I would consider to be pernicious causes. But what's so remarkable about these echo chambers is the power they have. I think there was actually a very illustrative moment just last week around the Democratic National Convention. You, I'm sure, have noticed that in the weeks beforehand, there were all these reports about the hundreds of thousands of protesters who were going to sweep through the streets of Chicago. And you had leaders of the Democratic Party seemingly nervous about what that was going to mean. There were reports, we don't know how true they are, that the pressure that was being applied from some of these radical groups helped contribute to the fact that Josh Shapiro was not chosen to be the vice presidential nominee. But when push actually came to shove, there wasn't that much going on. There were a couple of thousand protesters. Many of them were arrested, others dispersed on their own. The convention was not disrupted in any meaningful way. And in fact, when John and Rachel Goldberg Poland spoke in that hall about their son Hirsch, one of the hostages in Gaza, they received a sustained standing ovation, people chanting, "Bring them home." And this isn't a commentary on whether or not the Democratic Party is or is not better for Israel than the Republican Party. It's just how duped we were by this echo chamber, by this conventional wisdom that was swirling around mostly on Twitter that seemed ultimately to be so very far from the truth. And so it's incredibly important to break free of that and to basically tell the leaders of the parties, of our elected officials from either party and really around the world, look past Twitter. Twitter is not real life. And that's something that's difficult for me to say as someone who's so active there and someone who's gained some degree of notoriety by being as active as I have been. But I can acknowledge that the conversation that happens there is often very skewed and not actually representative of the broader conversation happening in America or around the world. And that's something we have to remind ourselves of constantly. It's still obviously quite powerful, as we saw last week and as we see regularly. There is a lot of cross-pollination between what happens on Twitter and then what happens in real life, but it is not real life. And I think that that's something we have to remind ourselves constantly if we're going to have some kind of a productive conversation on or offline.
You mentioned the DNC. You used to work at the U.S. House of Representatives on the Committee on Foreign Affairs. So shifting a little bit from media to actual current events, there is a feeling in America, certainly, that the Republican Party is much more favorable towards Israel, supporting Israel, caring about Israel, some of the policies that came out in the previous administration on Israel. And there was fear ahead of the DNC. Some of it maybe was we were comforted, in other ways not. There still remains some significant concern in the impact of the squad and others, though a couple members were defeated. From your perspective and your insight, is Israel becoming a wedge issue? Should we still be seeing it as a bipartisan issue? Obviously the American Jewish or pro-Israel community has to hedge somewhat. It'd be foolish to get behind one candidate when there's an excellent chance the other candidate could win, and then you'll have no seat at the table, no influence, no say. So it's important to be represented and supporting both sides. But from an analysis point of view, do you still think that it's a bipartisan issue? Are we seeing one party more favorable? What is it dangerous to make this a political? Where do you see this?
Well, I think there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that polls consistently show that the overwhelming majority of Americans remain supportive of Israel, that they side more with Israel than with her adversaries, that they're supportive of U.S. support for Israel, which of course is incredibly important at a moment like this and more generally. But the bad news is that that support is being eroded on the margins. And I would say that's true of both parties, both of the Democratic Party and of the extremes of the Republican Party. I agree with you. I think many have been concerned about certain statements made by members of the squad and have been encouraged by the fact that several members of the squad will not be returning in the next Congress. But the ideas that they propagate are still very present in the party, again, mostly in the margins. But we wonder the extent to which they are influencing decisions being made at higher levels as well, including, for example, the selection of a vice presidential candidate and certain policies that are being pursued or may be pursued in a future administration. I think ultimately what you said is exactly right. We have to do whatever we can to ensure that Israel remains a bipartisan issue, to strengthen support for Israel on both sides of the aisle. And that means that Jews who are aligned with the Democratic Party should continue to invest in strengthening those sentiments amongst Democrats, and those who are involved in the Republican Party should be doing that amongst Republicans. I do not think it is wise to put all our eggs in one basket. We are not single issue voters for the most part. We care about many different things, and that's totally legitimate. That's what America is all about. But it's important that our elected officials and those who would like to be our elected officials, candidates for public office, hear from us that this is an issue that matters to us and that they need to be developing their policies and positions accordingly. So that has always been my view. I've felt that way since as a college student. I interned for APAC. I was very active on campus, where I was very careful about making sure that I had excellent ties with both college Democrats and college Republicans. And I can tell you that at any given moment, the college Democrats were convinced I was a Democrat, and the college Republicans were absolutely sure I was a Republican. And I loved it. That was exactly the way I wanted it. But there are many others who may be politically involved in either party. And I think that's wonderful, as long as they are making sure that their voices are being heard and that they are pointing out that their voices are actually much more representative of where mainstream America is at, as opposed to those radicals who are totally unrepresentative of where most Americans are at and ultimately would be driving both parties in a very negative direction.
So let me ask a question then. You just mentioned the word influence. And I'm wondering, when you write an article or when you're I guess, do you consider yourself someone that's trying to influence people by your article, or are you reporting on the event that happened? For example, here you turn on the local 6 o'clock news and they'll talk about the swimmer that just got bitten by a shark. Like, no one cares. Like, it's not trying to influence policy or something. Which cat got stuck in the tree, or which fire consumed some business. But you look at every article you write, not just merely reporting, but it's an opportunity to somehow influence. Does that go into what you write?
Well, look, when I was at the Jerusalem Post, I built a wall between our news reporting and our opinion pages. And I did not really want reporters writing opinion pieces, and I didn't want us to hire people who had strong views to cover issues that they felt so strongly about. I felt very strongly about that because I think ultimately that's how we retain our credibility, while at the same time serving as a platform for a variety of views across the political and religious spectra. And I think that that's something that many news organizations do well. So some don't do as well as we might like. I can tell you that there are some organizations that have 2 editors-in-chief, where one editor-in-chief is in charge of news reporting and the other editor-in-chief is in charge of the opinion pages, and they don't report to one another. They report maybe to the owner, the publisher, but they have no professional sort of overlap. And I think that's actually quite admirable. And I would like to see more news organizations doing that kind of thing. I have never been a reporter. When I say never, I think maybe since high school. I haven't been a reporter. I've always been an editor or someone who dealt with ideas or had sort of a higher level of responsibility for what was going out in our name. And so I've actually been rather uncomfortable or even referring to myself as a journalist. I feel like I haven't sort of earned that title because I have been dealing with ideas and dealing with editorial decisions, but I haven't been the one sort of speaking to individuals, doing the hard work of getting the information, making sure that you're cross-referencing sources and so on and so forth. So most of my writing does aim to influence people, to contribute to the conversation. But one thing that I am very careful about, and this is something I mentioned early on, is to ensure that I'm basing my writing either in 280 characters on Twitter or longer form pieces wherever I might be publishing them on fact, on information that can be verified, that draws from reputable sources. Because ultimately, I think that is, first of all, much more convincing. And it's just more honest. I could be making things up or I could be drawing ideas out of a hat, but when you are coming armed with data and information and facts, that is often much more compelling and speaks to your own integrity in a way that I think readers find useful and ultimately more edifying than the alternative.
Well, why is this hostage deal not happened yet? Is the bigger obstacle Bibi and his considerations? Some would cynically say political. Is the bigger obstacle Sinwar, Hamas? Are they not really invested in it? Who's holding out longer? Do you think it's just a matter of time, or do you think it's not going to come to fruition? Where do you think we're at with the hostage deal?
I do think it's a matter of time. I think that at any given moment, one side or the other may be trying to jockey for a better position, or maybe trying to ensure that they get the sweeter deal. I think consistently for the past number of months, you've seen that Hamas has been the primary obstacle to reaching a deal. The President of the United States has said that. The Secretary of State has said that. It has been Hamas that has posed the primary obstacle to reaching a deal, which you would think they should want for their own people. We understand that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas's own men, are saying to him, we need a break. We can't continue sustaining this battle against Israel. We simply can't do it anymore. But he, again, has been sort of dragging this out as long as he can in an effort to get terms that are favorable to him. We understand that at the moment, the primary obstacle centers on the Philadelphia corridor, which, of course, is the land border between Sinai, the Egyptian Sinai, and Gaza, and which is an area that is incredibly porous and that we know Hamas has used for years to smuggle in arms and people and money, which is what enabled them to arm to the point that they were able to carry out the massacre of October 7th and keep this war going. And so Israel, which has been present in the Philadelphia corridor for the past few months, is saying, we won't go back to a situation where Hamas can keep doing the sort of things that it did previously, smuggling things in at will and rearming in order to carry out more October 7th massacres as they've said they do. Now, Hamas, of course, wants to retain that ability, and so it is objecting to any kind of ongoing Israeli presence in that corridor. Egypt, too, views it as a blow against their own national sovereignty. It's almost a statement on Israel's part that they don't trust Egypt to control its own border. Whether or not Egypt controls that border well is a different story. But the reality is that both Egypt and Hamas oppose any long-term Israeli presence there. But Israel's quite insistent that it won't go back to reality as it was prior to October 7th. That's a major, major sticking point right now. There are others as well, including the number of hostages to be released over what period of time. We don't even know how many as a whole are still alive. One of the sticking points related to that is that several months ago, Hamas did a bit of a switcheroo where they took the total number of hostages that were to have been released in the initial stage due to humanitarian reasons and said, well, we'll release some number of living hostages and then bodies as well. And Israel said, that's not what we're doing here. Like, yes, we want the bodies back. Of course, they deserve a respectful burial in their homeland, but we need to get the live hostages out first. So that seems to be a point of contention as well. And I think the last thing that has really been a major point of difference between Hamas and Israel has been about whether or not this deal means a total cessation, the end of all hostilities between Israel and Hamas. Hamas is insisting that this would be the end of all hostilities, so that even if differences do arise over the course of this negotiation process, over the course of the ceasefire, that Israel won't have the ability of restarting combat. And Israel saying, well, then that gives Hamas no incentive to actually resolve these issues. It actually gives them every incentive to drag this out as long as possible, knowing that they will be immune from any kind of military response. And so that has been a major point of contention. We'll have to see how that's resolved in the big picture, but I think that ultimately it is a matter of time. We are going to see a deal sooner rather than later.
Let me ask you, Avi. I know I as a pro-Israel person, a lot of family in Israel, feel so connected to Israel. I find it almost unbearably frustrating that the world opinion, and I'm not just talking the radicals on campuses and the people burning flags outside the DNC. We're not talking about the radical extremist, maybe hired, paid for antagonists or provocateurs. I'm talking even about just poorly informed average people around us. You know, they still think and they blame Israel that there's no ceasefire, right? So the whole ceasefire now movement, and even bring them home, that puts the whole burden and onus on Israel as opposed to let them go, which puts it on Hamas. And you even have leaders, and you have a presidential nominee who will talk about Israel, and it's enough time. And the truth is both sides, right? And because even Trump has said about Israel, right, that finish it up, finish this job, it's got to end. All the pressure seems to be on Israel, despite the fact that over and over and over again, Israel's agreed. And in this recent round of talks, America even came out, like you said, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, I don't remember which one, said, Israel's agreed to our version of the ceasefire. It's Hamas who's holding this back. There's only one party is a reason that innocent people in Gaza are dying, and that's Hamas. And yet the world doesn't see it. Is it a lost cause? Are we just bad at making the argument? Is it the classic Israel is terrible at Hasbara? Or is it a lost cause? It's just bias and anti-Semitism, and the world's against us. And no matter how right or righteous we are, we're just never going to be able to get this through. It's so infuriating.
Look, it is deeply frustrating, but I think when you say making the argument, I think that you have put your finger on part of the problem. We're all about arguments. We're all about bringing facts and figures, having rational conversation about solutions and problems and so on and so forth. And I think that's admirable, and that's the place I want to be. But the other side has horrific images of dead babies, of mass death, of deplorable living conditions, humanitarian situation. Now, you and I know that ultimately responsibility for everything that has been going on lies with Hamas. That were it not for Hamas's decision to perpetrate the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust on October 7th, every single person who has died in the 10 months since would still be alive. There would be no suffering in Gaza. None of what we're seeing now would be happening were it not for Hamas and their decision not only to launch this war, but to perpetuate it and keep it going, right? They have the ability to end it tomorrow by releasing the hostages and laying down their arms, and they've chosen not to. We know that. But ultimately, when you have us making that argument versus these horrific images and this footage, which, by the way, it's important to note this, people in Israel are not seeing to the same extent. We don't see those images. They're not broadcast on our evening news to the same extent that they are elsewhere in the world. That creates an imbalance. And I think it's somewhat natural that people would see those images, be horrified, and say, we need to have a ceasefire. Israel is the one that is engaging in firepower, right? We see the bombs coming down. We see this death that's happening in Gaza. We don't see nearly as much happening in Israel today. Israel, if you walk around, looks fairly normal. So the onus must be on Israel, and therefore Israel must be the one to initiate it and to cease fire and bring about this truce. And I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier is also quite apt. Ultimately, many people, most people, I would say, are quite well-intentioned, right? They just want an end to the death, and who can blame them? But what you end up having is this movement, including many of those who are marching for a ceasefire, that is made up of followers who are often quite ill-informed but well-intentioned, and is led by individuals who are quite well-informed but ill-intentioned. These are the people who are outright supporters of Hamas, who do not believe Israel has a right to exist, who believe that Israel is the manifestation of evil on earth and needs to be totally erased. If they don't also believe that Jews need to be erased, and some of them may believe that as well. But they latch onto and exploit the good intentions of the masses who just want an end to the suffering, and that's how you get to the place where so much of the sentiment today appears to put the onus on Israel as opposed to on the real perpetrators, which of course are Hamas.
It's infuriating. Maybe we're making a mistake by not also broadcasting images. Maybe October 7th we should have on a loop of the images and the rapes and the, and even right in the north, how many people have been displaced from their homes, or the poor chicken coop, or we should also have images on loop to try to win some of the world opinion. But it's
well, I can tell you that early on in the war there was an episode that really has stuck with me. Israel has for years had a practice of not showing the gory, bloody, awful results of acts of terror and war, because we believe in kavod hamet, dignity of the dead. We don't want to exacerbate the pain of the families. And so Israel does not, as a matter of practice, share those images with the world. But early on in the war, there were these reports that came out of a certain number of children who had been killed in one of the kibbutzim, and some of them had been found without heads, had essentially been beheaded. And immediately you had the Twitter mobs saying, that can't possibly be true. Show us the evidence. Show us the dead, beheaded babies. And this became such a powerful call that Israel, I'm sure in a very difficult decision, decided to depart from its longtime practice and released 3 photos of what can best be described as blackened baby bodies. There's no other way to describe it. It was one of the most horrific things I've ever seen. And these images arrived in our newsroom. And we found ourselves confronted with the question of, what do we do with them? On the one hand, we believe in dignity of the dead. We don't believe in atrocity pornography, which essentially is what the other side does all the time. And yet, on the other hand, we have a responsibility to our audience to share with them this information that has been made available to us and is being broadcast around the world. And so we found a way to thread that needle by putting up an article saying that we had seen these images and could confirm that, in fact, reports of dead babies were true. But we said, if you'd like to see the images, please click here, noting that they're deeply disturbing and so on and so forth. And we referred our audience to a government Twitter account where those images were being stored. But this is not an easy decision. And I'm sure editors and government officials are grappling with these questions to this very day, because we don't want to be those people. We don't want to exploit the pain and the horror and the suffering of our own people in order to score points against the other side. But the reality is that the other side doesn't think twice about doing exactly that. And ultimately, sentiment moves in that direction. And so how do you sort of navigate that, I think, is a question that many of us are confronting. And I'm not really sure what the answer is at all times.
Can I ask Rabbi Goldberg that question? In order to win the war, do you put aside kavod hamet? Do you say, listen, we would...
Yeah, it's complicated.
We are losing.
What does it do for the family members of the people in those images too? And the trauma that they have to see that. And some of them want that. I've shared before. I've several nephews who are fighting right now. My sister's son, who's been in Gaza for a very long time, and she says, she very often wants him home, wants him safe, wants him out. And then when she sees one of those images, or she reads one of those narratives or stories or reports from somebody who was there on October 7th, it reminds her, no, you stay there, you fight. That's why we're there. And even forget for the world opinion. She says, as an Israeli, as a mother of a soldier, sometimes she needs to be reminded what this is about and why we have to stay there and the resolve we have to have. And nothing speaks like those images and those narratives and those stories to make a person feel that resolve and that tenacity, which is not simple. It definitely is an open-ended question. And it's one of the tragedies of the war. It's one of the horrible things Hamas has done, taking lives literally, but putting us in a position that we have to debate this question is another casualty of this war. Do you think, Avi, we're going to find Sinwar? Israel's been incredibly successful beyond anyone's wildest imagination in Tehran and in other capitals to take out enemies against all odds, people that America hasn't been able to find, let alone lay their hands on. Was it the Wall Street Journal and New York Times had the story about how Israel took out a ghost? Was the headline, I think, just last week. Will we get Sinwar now? Now you see the headlines are that Sinwar is out of the tunnels and he's walking around dressed as a woman, of which there's enormous irony in his cross-dressing in Gaza.
Yeah, so, look, I think we are going to get him eventually. There have been reports that he has insisted that Israel commit to not assassinating him as part of this deal. I think Israel should absolutely agree to that. And then once he exposes himself, drop a bomb on his head. But at the end of the day, I think there's not going to be a choice. He's going to expose himself at some point, just as Mohammed Def did after many, many years in hiding. He was quite elusive. Eventually, he was exposed, and of course, he was taken out. I believe the same will happen to Yahya Sinwar. He bears ultimate responsibility for so much of the death and destruction that we've experienced on both sides of the border over the past 10 months, and of course for many, many years beforehand as well. To my estimation, he's a dead man walking. It's a matter of time.
And will that be an Osama bin Laden moment? Will that give Israel what it needs to declare a victory to let Israel pivot in the war?
I think what will give Israel that moment is the return of the hostages. I think we have been stuck on October 7th as a society because we are just wrought with so much anxiety over the fate of these people, these innocent people who are being held against their will for nearly a year now in Gaza. I for a very long time sort of struggled with the language to describe what we were experiencing here. And I spoke to many, many delegations, solidarity missions and so on that were coming to Israel. And I didn't really know how to say what we were all feeling. We knew that we were feeling something. I didn't know exactly what it was. And then I was on a panel at some point with a good friend of mine who's a rabbi. And he described the concept of aninut, which of course is the period after someone dies, but before the funeral, where the family members are in the state of immediate shock and trauma, and they are exempt from engaging in mitzvot, right? They're just supposed to sit with their pain because the rabbis understood that is all we could expect of someone in that moment. And he said, we as a society are in a state of collective aninut. We haven't even moved on to the point of post-trauma because we're still in the trauma of that day. Yeah. I think that is extremely apt and extremely true. And ultimately, the only thing that will enable us to move on from that will be to see those hostages return. And I think, and I say this with tremendous pain, we have to acknowledge that not all the hostages may return, right? There may be hostages who are dead, whose bodies may never be recovered. I mean, if you see the images of Gaza, who knows how many hostages and how many bodies are actually going to be recovered. But until we see those who we know to be alive brought home, I don't see how Israel will be able to move forward. I don't know how we can declare any kind of victory. I think seeing those hostages brought home will be a partial step in that direction. And of course, yes, making sure that Hamas can never again pose a threat to Israel as it did on October 7th, and then eliminating those who are responsible for October 7th would give us that picture of total victory that I think we also deeply deserve.
We're so grateful for your time. Let's close out with a little insight into who Avi Mayer is. Born in New York, grew up in Israel and in Maryland, served in the IDF. You were in these positions in America. We spoke about the House of Representatives and others, served in the Army. Who are your inspirations, your career path, which has been fascinating? Who inspired you? Who motivated you? Who are your role models that really put you in that direction to not just be passionate about Israel and the Jewish people, but to be a spokesperson and to use a voice and influence in that direction?
Well, I think one of my key inspirations was my previous boss, Natan Sharansky. I worked with him for 7.5 years. I don't know many people who have the integrity that he has, the deep sense of meaning and mission that he just radiates wherever he goes. He's an extremely modest man, but one of tremendous depth, despite his fairly diminutive stature. And I have found him to be an extremely wonderful person to work with, to work alongside, to see in action, and he's absolutely inspiration of mine. Abba Eban, Israel's legendary longtime foreign minister, was a statesman of the Jewish people who articulated our position to the world in ways that few others were able to up until that point, and I would say few have since. And I think he's a tremendous inspiration to me as well. And quite frankly, my parents who sacrificed a great deal in order to move us to Israel. They put their professional and sometimes personal considerations aside in order to raise me and my sisters in our country. I will always be grateful to them for that, and they will always remain role models of mine for that very reason.
Beautiful. We're so grateful for all the work that you do, and we hope that you can return to reporting on, where the best shawarma is in Israel. There should be quiet and peace and the hostages home. And obviously there'll always be many political things to talk about in Israel. We'll return to arguing, debating, hopefully doing a better job of that without such divisiveness, issues like judicial reform and the like. But thank you for all that you do. Personally, I'm grateful for what you do to inform me on what's going on in Israel. And we just pray that the hostages are home and the soldiers are back with their families, and that we have a sweeping victory over our enemies.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Amen. Thank you.
Catch us next time for another peek behind the Bima.